So we live in a world at war with itself, in a war that most people never ever see, they don't understand, and they're not sure that the people that are talking about it are even being honest with them, or they just think they're crazy. When most people hear the word war, they think of bombs falling and missiles going off and ships and planes and soldiers on the ground with machine guns and all kinds of weaponry, and that's not the war I'm talking about. There's a bigger war that everybody's in, and that's meta-war. And meta-war is the war that's being waged behind all of the obvious stuff that you see on the surface. And the reason why that's a big deal is that because most people don't realize they're in that war, well, they're vulnerable to those that are using that war to try to enslave, right? To deceive and devour and destroy them. And when they don't know they're in that war, they're very easily used as proxies in that war against those that are actually fighting for the people that are being made proxies, trying to help them understand what's happening to them and that they're being used against their own best interests. So we have to recalibrate how we think about war. And we have to understand that the meta-war, the war beyond all wars in the unseen, is what is impacting the scene. Now, some folks may be thinking, are you talking about cyber, narrative warfare? I'm talking even beyond that. I'm talking about the war that is being waged in every heart and every mind and every body, including, the one that, is talked about in various cultures. Meta-war is another word for spiritual war in some ways, right? But it involves a whole lot of pieces, a lot of things that have impacts on how people view the world, how they view themselves, and how they view one another. And that's why it's a big deal. Because most people, not realizing that they are in this war, right, are being harmed, being enslaved, and being used in that war against their own best interests and against the interests of others, both in the here and now and what I call the forever after. Now, to some, that may seem like religion, or I'm being, ooky spooky, talking about metaphysical stuff. Okay, you're free to think that. But before you turn it off, I want you to consider, where do you think the concepts and ideas come from that made you think that about those that talk about these things? Could it be that maybe you have been deceived and are being deceived and you don't realize it? Something to think about, something to consider, because what if I'm right? What if I am? How would you know if you just discount it out of hand and you never actually investigate what I'm telling you? Well, you couldn't. You wouldn't know. And that means that you have a questioning of your own perspectives and whether they're right that you need to ask. You may find out that you're right. You may find out that you're very, very wrong. You have more to gain by investigating it than denying it out of hand and thinking that it's a bunch of psychobabble or metaphysical bullshit or spiritual, pontificating. Something to consider. Because as it is for people, so too it is for nations. Do you ever drive around and think about what could be? Do you ever look at old buildings, neighborhoods, cities, and think about, how could you make this better? I do it all the time. I do it wherever I go. Second nature for me. I think about what can be and not just what is. It's an exercise I learned to do over the course of my entire life, and I've been doing it since I was a child. It helps me stay sharp and be creative. It also keeps me thinking about not just what is, but what might be, and what could be if we work together. So I like to go when I'm in cities and just kind of wander around and look. I like to look at what's around me and think about, what do people need? What could make this a better city, a better town? What are some ways that we could help people get better opportunities for jobs? How can we better use space? All around me, like right across the street and right behind me over here is, our buildings. They're buildings that are not being used or being used very sparingly. They're great buildings. This area I'm sitting in was supposed to be the innovative economic district for Richmond. Unfortunately, they didn't follow through. Now, it needs to be that. It could be that. And there's all the things in place to do that. But what do you think has stopped that? Politicization. Everything's been politicized and everybody's fighting over everything. And instead of working together, all the opportunities and things that could be happening for everybody are being stopped by a very few. Now, who do you think that benefits? It surely doesn't benefit you. It doesn't benefit the nation at large, nor does it help our nation become something better, more fair, more just, more equitable. And it surely doesn't help put people back to work and address some of the problems that we have while inspiring people, right? Equipping people, encouraging people to do other things, to take risk, to step out, to dream, to think about what could be. Now, who does that help? It's surely not the entire nation. And it only benefits a very few people, and only for the short term, because that short-term gain, right, chokes off the long-term opportunities, the long-term opportunities for everybody, including probably you. It also fails in another area, addressing the needs that we have in the present time for everyone. So when you look at that, and you think about how the impacts of that create cascades throughout the entire society across the 7 spheres of influence, I want you then to put it into a warfare frame of mind. Who does it benefit if we're at each other's throats and not doing what we can do and need to do as a nation for everyone? Well, it benefits your enemies. It benefits those that desire to see this country laid low to the ground. It benefits those that only care about themselves that are here. and their own short-term gain, right? It does not benefit the totality of the whole. It impacts everyone, and ultimately will impact those people and nations involved in doing the things I just said. Now, how do you change that? Well, first off, you have to realize that's part of the meta war. You also have to realize that you're being ruled by fear, confusion, and you're being tempted with counterfeits as a way out. And as long as you're tempted by counterfeits and you accept those counterfeits, well, you're becoming a slave to a lie, and a lie ultimately, in the end, will have a bigger cost associated with it than the short-term gain was worth. So, I want you to consider that in light of the divisions and the narratives you see in our nation. You are being harmed in diverse ways. Now, I use that term for a very specific reason. Remember, I said what diversity means. It's not what you think it means. What it means is to divert, distort, and or divide. It's not about pluralism. And you should ask yourself why everybody feels so compelled to have to use it and buy into it, and why your companies are being forced to do it when it's destroying them and turning people against them, and it's creating the very opposite of what it promised. That, my friends, is a deception. That's what I mean you're in a war. And that war is deeper, more broad-based, and more damaging over the short, mid, and long term than you have any idea. Now, there's some people that probably got triggered because I said I didn't like the word diversity, and they're going to make all kinds of faulty assumptions. Well, they're free to do that as well. Okay? And if you're one of them, I'm just going to tell you now that all you're doing is proving my point about how you've been co-opted into a lie, either unknowingly or by choice. Either way, there are consequences to that. And if I didn't care, I wouldn't tell you. So, check your emotive and try to listen through the noise in your mind and your physical triggered responses in your body, and try to understand why I'm telling you this. And try to understand why it's important that you fight through your fear and your confusion and be willing to actually see something other than your own self-reflection. The reflections of your good and your bad. Because if you don't, you won't just be a soldier for the other side in a proxy way, or a prisoner to a lie. You'll ultimately create the conditions to be a casualty, even if that's self-martyrdom in a false context. You are being used against your own best interests and the best interests of everybody in the country, regardless of where they are on the political spectrum, and regardless, right, of the pigmentation of their skin or their gender. If you base your identity on anything in the temporal, you are deceived. It's temporal because it's temporary. That means it doesn't last. It has no permanence. It's shallow. It's a deception. You are much more and capable of much more than such myopathy. But you see, that's how the lie gets a hold of people. And it wedges them, and it forces them, and it squeezes them into a little tiny area of their life, which itself is distorted, and locks them in, making them a slave to a lie, and ruling them with fear and confusion. Ultimately, that path leads to destruction, usually self-destruction, but it leaves a wake of destruction in its path. Think of all the things that could be done if we weren't stuck in that paradigm in this country. Think about how much progress, how much opportunity, and how much of our nation's problems, how many of our nation's problems could be, being solved. Well, we can't do that, can we? While you're going the direction that you're going and you're playing the Babylonian game, right? That's why there's desolation here. That's why I can honestly tell you where this is going if this trend continues, because it's a historical trend. And what it always ends in is destruction. Every single time. Wouldn't you rather live in a country where we're all able to contribute and to create something and to dream big and inspire one another and to respect one another and treat one another as we'd like to be treated? Look out for one another's best interests. You see, here where we're in is where the juxtaposition is, because that's not what we have, is it? Right? The false utopia you're trying to build is dystopia. And it's actually the thing blocking the real thing from actually occurring in a bigger way, though imperfectly still in this world. It is, in fact, enslaving you to childishness, to lies, to fear and confusion. It is destroying you. It is sucking the marrow out of your life by offering counterfeits of the real. I think that we can overcome this, but it's not going to be without pain. But that pain will not be nearly as bad as many of you staying on the trajectory that you're on, continuing to worsen the predicament that we're all in, especially you. Now consider that.